Hello there, it's Tom here, and Magnolia and I will be going through chapter 52 of Gunnerkrigg Court, Sneak.
Hello there.
And after the big mix-up from the previous chapter, we are opening with Kat travelling to see Annie in the new room that she's been relocated to.
So this room is pretty distinct. Was there a particular reason you gave Annie this huge empty room like this?
Yeah, kind of. The room is just a huge blank white space with all her belongings just in one back corner. And I designed it this way because I wanted it to be a visual representation of the isolation that Annie is in right now.
So why did Tony choose this room for her? Did he think she would like it?
Well, I made sure not to mention how this room was chosen for Annie, because there's going to be a lot of stuff happening with Annie and the kind of forced isolation that she is in that actually ends up being her own doing. And we'll find that out a bit later on in the chapter and in the subsequent chapters. And so, like in a visual representation, this room, it's very huge, but there's no reason why Annie would have all of her stuff right at the very far end of it. It's as if she chose to put all the stuff in her room and all her personal belongings as far away from anyone else and the entrance of the room as possible. A little bit because she's isolating herself from everyone else. And I kind of wanted to mirror that in the sense that anytime anyone tries to reach out, whether it's from Kat or the kids in her class sending a card like this, her initial reaction is to just recoil from it and keep herself separate and not really open to anyone reaching out to give her support at this point.
I noticed Kat specifically points out that she thinks Winsbury is into Annie.
Yeah, and that is probably set up for something that's going to happen later on in the story.
I noticed that Annie mentions feeling large and in the way compared to, her classmates who are smaller than her. And she also finds herself in this room in which she is very small in, and I wonder if it's sort of a psychological way of making herself feel smaller.
It pretty much is. It is another example of her being separated, either actually separated or feeling like she's separated. And seeing herself as isolated from other people.
I noticed that in this chapter there's a recurring thread of people not really listening to Annie even when they're trying to help her.
Yeah, and that was intentional because I was expecting pretty much everyone to be against Tony at this point, the readers and the characters. And I very deliberately wanted it to seem that the only person who really was on Tony's side was Annie. And everybody's assuming that Tony is doing something weird or acting out of character despite nobody actually knowing his character, or up to something. And the one who is being affected most by his actions is actually the only one who is even partially standing up for him. And I wanted to make sure that that was kind of a recurring theme in this chapter and subsequent ones, and explore that a little bit when Tony meets up with Donny a little bit later in this chapter. And while I wanted it to seem strange that Annie would be sticking up for her dad, I did also want to explore the situation where people were rushing to help without actually listening to the person that they're trying to help.
The other thing that I was wondering about was, it seems like this thing with Renard and Annie having not fully passed ownership to Tony, even though she's telling him to his face that she did. This seems like one of the only times where she is sort of directly lying to him or disobeying him. Do you feel like maybe she was pressured into that by Kat, or is that something she did feel like she had to do?
Yeah, it will be revealed later on in this chapter that Annie has actually passed ownership of Renard onto Kat instead of her father. So she is directly lying to him here. And I wanted to do that because despite all the changes that Annie has gone through right now, she is still the Annie that we know, and she's not somebody who would give up her friend quite so quickly as it seemed. So Kat extends a reluctant dinner invitation to Tony, and he leaves the room after accepting. And then Parley and Smitty turn up. And the first thing that Parley does is mention Annie's hair and assume that she was forced to cut it. Kind of keeping with the theme of people disregarding the things that Annie is trying to tell them here.
Was it hard to get used to drawing Annie with hair like this?
Not really. I've been kind of looking forward to drawing her hair like this because I knew for a long time that she was going to have her hair cut off. So I was kind of looking forward to just giving her a bit of a different hairstyle. And I kind of like the angular shape that this gives her. It pretty much accomplished what I was looking for, which is to say, really reining in her design and making her seem very visually different from she was just a couple chapters ago, even though the only difference that she's gone through is a change in hairstyle.
Well, also, like you said about people not listening to Annie, it's a little bit sad that Annie directly asks Kat not to do this, and Kat's gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, that's right. This whole chapter is kind of an example of people trying to help somebody without actually asking if that person either wants their help or wants the kind of help that they are providing. Kat is kind of taking the role of righteous indignation here and feeling that it's her duty to stand up for her friend and figure out what the evil father is doing, despite the fact that the entire time Annie is saying that things are not so bad and that she's dealing with them in her own way.
This page in this scene is a favorite of mine because Tony's apartment is basically my old apartment that I used to live in a few years ago.
Yeah, that's right. This apartment is based on the Brooklyn apartment that you were living in at the time.
And when you saw that apartment, were you like, that's perfect for Tony? Or was it just a decision you made?
No, it was kind of the opposite. It was more like I wanted to design a room for Tony, and then I realized that the layout of the apartment was pretty much what I was looking for, especially the wooden floors and the very high ceilings. And I wanted the entire apartment to seem very empty, just an armchair and a work desk.
One thing I was wondering about was, I think we've heard Renard mention Tony in Firespike and his opinion of him, and obviously he dislikes him as the man that Surma chose over him, but I don't remember if we ever got a sense if they had met before. What does Renard think of Tony at this point? How much interaction has he actually had with him?
Yeah, he's aware of Tony, but he's not ever really interacted with him.
So really Renard is getting to know Tony just as much as anyone else in these scenes.
Yeah, pretty much. It wasn't long after Tony and Surma got together that they left the court, at which point Renard was already captured by the court there. And here we get a sense that Tony isn't doing anything super strange just yet, because Kat asks Renard if he's done any weird experiments, and all it turns out is that all Tony really does here in the apartment is spend his evenings in silence. So even Renard, who's spent some time with him at this point, is no more aware of what it is that Tony is up to, or even if he's up to anything.
Do you think, the impression that I got was that when Kat says this thing about giving Renard permission to hurt Tony, it seems to me like Renard is a little bit taken aback that she would say that.
Yeah, he is. She is passively making a threat of physical harm against Tony here, because she's still under the impression that despite not finding any evidence to back it up, that Tony is actually up to something, and that Renard might be in direct danger. But they can't wait around too long because Tony does come back, and the scene ends. And it's time for Tony and Annie to head over to the Donlands house for dinner.
So, one thing I notice here is that what Tony says here about immediately bringing up Annie's cheating, it seems to me an indication not just that he's a mean guy, but that he is really bad at reading a room.
Oh, he definitely is. It's
like just an inappropriate thing to bring up, and it makes it seem like there's more going on than just him trying to make Annie feel bad.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that he is trying to make her feel bad here. I wanted it to seem like he was just bluntly bringing up a fact that their two families, as they are, had in common, even if it is something completely inappropriate. It's like the only thing that they have in common is their daughters, and then he feels the need to apologize for how his daughters acted.
How close friends are Anya and Tony specifically?
No, they're not close friends at all. Tony is her husband's friend rather than somebody that she was really close to. They were all part of the same friends group back when they were younger, but as we'll learn, Tony finds it extremely difficult to get close to anybody, really. So Donny is kind of in the position that Annie is in that he kind of has a history with Tony and sort of knows his personality. And to anyone else, it would seem strange that they are friends at all, since obviously Tony is not a very personable man. But because of this history, this allows Donny to interact with Tony in a different manner than Annie or anyone else does. And in fact, Donny's pretty blunt towards him and speaks to him in a very familiar tone. Kind of a tone that might seem a little combative or rude, but I wanted it to seem more like it was more informed by their past history. So, for example, Donny brings up the fact that Tony is missing a hand now, and Tony tries to shrug it off as if it's nobody's concern. And while one might assume that a close friend would try and coax the information out of Tony, Donald is perfectly fine to just say fine and breeze past the subject and continue basically grilling him on the questions that everybody else wishes they could ask, but probably feels that they can't.
This is one of my favorite pages because I think that this last panel of Tony is one of the most humanizing scenes of him, because you can really feel the tension as he struggles to answer.
Sure, I was hoping to make this scene sort of tense and very unsatisfying, especially for Kat and the readers. And really, Kat here is the stand-in for the readers. And I wanted it to seem like these two friends, Tony and Donald, are seeing each other for the first time in a long time, but they're still very familiar with each other. And even though Tony is being very reserved, he knows Donny well enough that he can shut him down and stop him asking about a certain line of questioning that he doesn't want to discuss.
Would you say that Annie does the same thing with Kat in some ways?
Oh, sure. She did in the previous chapter, where she is able to shrug off certain suggestions or lines of questioning that she didn't want to talk about. And that's just a trait that the two of them share. But here, Kat, as the audience stand-in, interjects into the conversation, and things get pushed a little bit too far, and so Tony is the kind of person that will then extract himself from the situation, and this brings the evening to a close.
Those last two panels are very memorable to me. It's hard to remember a time where Annie would really shut down Kat like that. Would you consider this a significant moment?
Yeah, it's very significant. And it all plays to just how strange Annie is acting at this point. Kat and the readers have not experienced Annie really shrugging off Kat like this in the past. And it all points to something larger going on that we still need to figure out. And luckily Donny is aware that there is something going on, and he knows his friend well enough that while he was being very direct with Tony, he knows that if Tony isn't going to want to open up at this point, especially with other people around, there's just no way that he's going to get any information out of him.
It's sort of a relief to see Donny and Anya talking about the situation. It makes it feel like Annie is a bit more safe, I guess. Yeah,
and really she is. She is safe right now. And there are a lot of people who are on her side and concerned for her. It's just that it seems that Annie is not willing to accept anyone's help. And that plays into the fact that there is something else going on. And we will, in fact, see at the end of this chapter that there is a little bit more to the situation here.
Just a quick question. Annie and her father obviously don't live together. Even though Kat was with her parents, she doesn't live with them because she lives in the friend's apartment. Is it common at all for kids to live with their parents at the court, or is it generally not something that happens at all?
No, it's not something that really ever happens. Well, the kids will get dorms that are different every year. The parents are, if they live in the court, they're more likely to have a single home that they will live in. And it's very much encouraged for the students to not live with their parents.
So it's not that Tony is deliberately avoiding that?
No, that's right. She's just in now essentially a single dorm room on her own. And when she's left alone, we can see that she has done something to herself to manage the situation that she is in. And that's something that we will be exploring in the next chapter. But until then, this bonus page is a very serious bonus page with Renard dealing with this very serious situation that he has found himself in.
I don't have anything to say about that.
No, I don't think there is anything to say about that. And that is the end of that chapter. Come back again for chapter 53, Annie and the Fire.
Thanks for listening.